So here we have the modified bobbin winder. As you can see, this was made for those big conical spools and made to come around here and go onto bobbins. It works very, very quickly, and there's been several modifications to it and a lot of experiments, as you can see from all this Swiss cheese here. But I think I got it working satisfactorily. The main modifications are we have an adapter here, and we have a spring metal clip, and we have a place for a standard spool of thread. And all of this stuff has been moved that way, a ways from standard. This is moved back. The motor position and the transformer position have not, the transformer position was changed slightly, sorry. Make sure this switch is off before you do anything. It should stay off while you're loading the machine, obviously. So the first thing you do is you want to put a spool of thread on here. I don't think it really matters which direction it goes. Maybe it does, hopefully it doesn't. You keep these on, these go to the back. You put your spool of thread on here, punch a hole through the paper to do that. We put the thread over the top hook, put the thread through the top hole, and reel it around the tensioner. And that's all set. Washer on first, flat washer. Put this brass part with the knurled end to the right, because this side is flat and the other is a little bit concave. We need that flatness for a lock washer. You just kind of put it sloppily on there. Put the lock washer on, and then put this thing on, the wing nut. And it's necessary to put the second nut on here in order for the brass nut not to become unreeled. So we need to put the brass nut snug but not very tight, really. That was a big bunch of experiments. So you want it to just sort of barely be there. And you want this thing to be rubbing against the felt. So that feels pretty darn good. Just not on really strong. And then this probably is best as a two-handed operation. Crush this until you see that lock washer is flat. And then spin this thing a little, make sure it feels a little tight to me, so I'm going to back it off a shade. And then I'm going to really reel it. It might be the best thing to do is to turn the brass nut, to crush it and just hold on to the wing nut. Yeah, that feels really good. So then we take this, let it flop. It's not a big deal if it's flopping around a little. Then we have our bobbin, and you put the small flange against the adapter. Turn the part until it feels like it's locked, or it's onto the, it's adapting properly and not sliding. Then take this and simply wind it a few times around it. I think I found that the center is the best place to have it wound. So we'll try to do that. Just 2 or 3 times is probably good enough. Cut it. Put this thing on. I think I'm gonna tighten that machine. And spin it a little to make sure everything's seated pretty nice. Seems to be. So you want to make sure that this arm is falling in the center, actually a shade to the left, maybe even touching the small flange would be good. You do not want it to touch, you do not want the blade to touch this flange here, because I found that when it spins it could actually catch onto the flange and and completely unscrew the bobbin. So that is not good. So it looks pretty good to me now. This feels good. The other thing on the feels pretty good. So we'll give it a try. So it should, oh, the other thing is you got to make sure that this switch, sometimes this switch will sort of get stuck. I'm not sure why. So make sure the switch is open, and it's not like this, because if it's like this, nothing's going to happen. So you might have to give it a little press that way. When you hear that other click, that there's another micro switch here that's not this one, that again makes a similar click, so don't get worried if you hear a click. Then we're going to just turn her on and see what the hell happens. Here we go. Boom. And what's great is it's rasping back and forth, and then it stopped. So now, the first thing you do is turn off the switch. Turn it off every time, even if you think you've got this wired, you know, the method wired. Because these micro switches, when they come off and on, they'll switch off and on and they could get things spinning again when you don't want them. If this switch is off, you're cool. Take that off, undo that. Pull this off. Ooh, and it looks pretty okay. There's a slight taper to it, but it's not bad. And you'll also notice that it's filled a little shy of the outermost white ring, so it's not overstuffed. And it looks pretty damn good. So that's cool. So there's a few things that are important. The first one that's routinely important is to, there's something to play with. The first one that's routinely important is to make sure that metal tab is either kind of on the center or actually maybe a bit to the left, almost touching this flange, this smaller flange here. Because when that thing spins, it will now not interfere with the big flange. If it catches on the big flange, we would have some problems. It would start unscrewing from the bobbin. That one, I know it's an obvious thing, but it took me a while to figure that shit out. So the other thing is to seat this thing carefully on the adapter. And then what you want to do with this is you want to kind of screw around with it a little to, maybe don't screw around with it at all once you got it. But it should be making it pretty flat against there. There's some friction tape over on this edge that reduces chatter a lot. I was having a lot of problems with chatter, and it was really wearing out the adapters. But friction tape seems to have solved that problem. And what else? The other thing is you want to first of all, on the tension, I just got barely any tension on here. Just a few turns, maybe 3-4 turns, to keep this pretty loose. And that seems to be just fine. The problem I had with too much tension is it just wasn't unreeling off the spool perfectly, like it seems to be doing now. And if it's loosely on there, if the thread is a little more loose and not digging into the spool, it seems to work a little better. Now this might be a completely different situation if we have the standard conical thread, because there's probably some resistance here on the thread spool that we just don't have with the conical thread. That's probably got virtually no resistance at all as it pulls off of it. So, so maybe you would need, for the conical thread spool, you would need to adjust this to be a little tighter, but whatever. And then the biggest one that had such a surprising effect was if you see it not, once you're done, if you see it sort of favoring, oh, these are fantastic. These are really good. But if you see it sort of favoring one edge or another, just tilt this guy, this tensioner, so that the string is winding away from the side that's getting too full, if that makes any sense. And it'll start winding very nicely right in the center once that's adjusted. So you can bend it if you'd like, or if that doesn't work out, if it's way off, you might have to adjust these two screws and play around with it a little to get just perfect thread happening. And then finally, the micro switch, you might have to bend this so that it clicks off exactly right. I have it clicking off well short of the outer ring, because I really want to avoid thread interfering with the workings of the machine. So maybe the bobbin isn't quite as full as it should. And this is not bad, but maybe the bobbin isn't quite as full as it could be. But so what? You want your bobbin and your machine to work. So I say don't get greedy. And then you just put this again. You just put this on. Again, this should be maybe touching, or it's definitely not touching the right, and it's pressed pretty hard by the spring to go into the machine. So it looks pretty good. So we're going to try it and see what happens. Here we go. pressure really nice, back and forth very evenly. And then it stopped. Wow. Sometimes things work. Shut the switch off. Take it off. Take a look. It's pretty damn good. Pretty damn good. So, I hope you can use this thing. I have an extra adapter. There are a couple of adjustments I still want to make. I'm going to try to lock this screw in a little better with some Loctite blue, and I'll give you some in case you need it. And what else? Put some JB weld on here to make sure this sort of stays. If it needs replacement, you might have to reef on it. Oh, that's a good point. So I usually take a screwdriver, flathead screwdriver, and just on this edge here, I pry it back, and it'll come off eventually. If this needs replacing once it's, yeah, that'll probably be good. If it doesn't come off after all that, and it's got JB weld on it, we're going to need to take a Dremel and do a couple of longitudinal cuts, like I had to do on this guy. I was sitting there, I had to cut him, you know, right off on two edges there and pry it off of there. There it is. I hope it works for you. Hacked with love from Steve. Anyway, or Steven or whatever. Anyway, bye.